Okay, for number 14, it says find the value of W and then X. So they want us to find W first. Well, W, we can use SOHCAHTOA. W is the opposite side of the angle 50, and 10 is the hypotenuse. So we're going to use sine, because sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Sine of 50 is equal to opposite over hypotenuse, or W over 10. Multiply by 10 on both sides, and we get W equals 10 times the sine of 50. In your calculator, that would be 7.7. So W is 7.7, and then to get X, X is this in the other side of the triangle. We have a right triangle over here as well. So W, which is now 7.7, is the opposite side of X, and 11 is the hypotenuse. So we can say sine equals the sine of X degrees equals opposite over hypotenuse, or 7.7 over 11. Multiply by 11, we're looking for the angle X. So we can do the inverse sine. So when you're looking for the angle, you just do the inverse function, whether it's inverse sine or inverse cosine or inverse tangent. So the angle X is inverse sine of 7.7 over 11, which is approximately 44 degrees. All right, here's number 15. It says Jesse is building a ramp for loading motorcycles onto a trailer. The trailer is 2.8 feet off the ground. To avoid making it too difficult to push a motorcycle up the ramp, Jesse decides to make the angle between the ramp and the ground 15, or 15 degrees. To the nearest hundredth of a foot, find the length of the ramp. All right, so here's a picture of the ramp. The angle of elevation is 15 degrees, and it said the ramp was, or the trailer anyway, the trailer was 2.8 feet off the ground, so that's this height here. And the length of the ramp is the hypotenuse, so we'll call that X. Well, 2.8 is the opposite side of the angle. X is the hypotenuse, so that means we're going to be using sine. The sine of 15 is equal to opposite over hypotenuse, which is 2.8 over X. We will multiply by X and, at the same time, divide by sine 15. So X would be 2.8 divided by sine 15, and then your calculator gives you 10.8 feet. All right, number 16, it says use the trig ratio that sine of A is equal to 0.38 to determine which angle of the triangle is angle A. Well, as we're given, we know that sine of A has to be 0.38. So then what we would need to do is to see what ratio, and of course sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Well, I discovered that if I take 0.05 and divide it by 13, that is equivalent to 0.38. So now, knowing that the 0.5 is the opposite, would have to be opposite, and 13 would have to be the hypotenuse, then 0.5 is the opposite of only angle 2. So that would mean that angle 2 would have to be angle A. Number 17, it says find the sine of angle A to the nearest hundredth. Well, here's angle A, and we know that angle A is, the sine of angle A is opposite over hypotenuse. So that means we'd have to find the hypotenuse first. We'll call it X. And using the Pythagorean theorem, we have 4 squared plus 2 squared equals X squared. 4 squared is 16, 2 squared is 4, 16 plus 4 is 20. So X squared is 20. And so X would then be the, X is equal to the square root of 20, which can be split into square root of 4 times the square root of 5. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 5 remains, so we have 2 square root of 5. is the hypotenuse. Now the sine of A is opposite, which is the 2, over hypotenuse, which is x, and we found x to be 2 square root of 5. So sine A would be 2 over 2 square root of 5. The 2's cancel out, so that would be 1 over the square root of 5. And the decimal answer is 0.45. All right, number 18 says the coordinates of the vertices of triangle RPQ are, point R is 2 comma negative 1, which would be this point here. Point P is 2 comma 2, which is over 2 up 2, that's here. And then point Q is negative 2, negative 1, which is here. And they want us to find the measure of angle P. All right, so that's this angle right in here. Well, so if I just redraw that, I know I can tell from the coordinates that the distance from R straight up to P, that's a distance of 3 units. So that's going to be 3 on the right side. And you can tell from the coordinates that the distance from R to Q along the bottom side is 4. So we have a triangle that is 3 on one side, 4 on the other side. And then this angle P up here is the angle we're looking for. And I recognize that 4 is the opposite side of angle P, and that 3 is the adjacent side of angle P. So that means that tangent of P would be 4 over 3, opposite over adjacent. So then to get angle P, I could do the inverse tangent of 4 over 3. And so the inverse tangent of 4 over 3 is 53.1 degrees. All right, number 19 says an eagle 300 feet in the air spots its prey on the ground. The angle of depression to its prey is 15 degrees. What is the horizontal distance between the eagle and its prey, around to the nearest foot? All right, so we're going to have a couple of pictures here. We have this picture here is this point up here represents the eagle. This point P represents the prey, and it says the angle of depression is 15. Well, the angle of depression is not this angle up here inside the triangle. It's the angle from the horizontal down to the hypotenuse. So that angle is 15, which is outside of the triangle. That means that the angle down here where P is also 15, because these would be alternate interior angles. So that's 15 degrees. This height would be 300, because that's the height of the eagle. All right, so over here we have the triangle, 15 degrees. This length down here would be x, which is what we're trying to find, because that's the horizontal distance. 300 is the height here. 300 is the opposite of this 15 degree angle, and x is the adjacent side of the angle. So that means the tangent, which is opposite over adjacent, the tangent of 15 is 300 over x. Multiplying by x and then dividing by tangent 15 gives us x equals 300 divided by tan 15, and the calculator gives you a result of 1120 feet. And here's number 20. You have a pilot flying at an altitude of 1.8 kilometers sights the runway directly in front of her. The angle of depression to the beginning of the runway is 31 degrees. The angle of depression to the end of the runway is 23 degrees. What is the length of the runway? Round to the nearest tenth of a kilometer. All right, so we're going to have to do this in like 2 or 3 stages. Here in this picture, here's the plane that is 1.8 kilometers above the ground. The plane sights the beginning of the runway, which is this point here, And that angle of elevation is 31 degrees here outside the triangle, which means it's also 31 in this lower right corner. We're going to call this distance x, which is the distance from the runway to the plane. We'll call that x. Now, the plane also sees the end of the runway, which is this purple dot. That's the end of the runway. The blue dot is the beginning of the runway. So when the plane looks at the end of the runway, the angle of elevation is 23 degrees, which means it's also going to be 23 degrees in the lower right corner because they're alternate interior angles. Now we're going to solve a couple of triangles here. We'll solve the blue one first to get x. So we know that 1.8 is the opposite of angle 31, and x is the adjacent to the angle 31. So we'll use tangent of 31 as opposite over adjacent, or 1.8 over x. Multiplying by x and dividing by tan 31, we get x is equal to 1.8 divided by tan 31, which gives you 3. So this x right here is 3. Now, we will solve the big triangle, which goes from the purple dot at the end of the runway to where the plane is. So this long side here, we're going to call that z. So again, 1.8 is the opposite of the angle 23. Z is the adjacent of the angle 23. So then we can say tangent again. Tangent 23 is 1.8 over z. So z is going to be 1.8 divided by tan 23, and the calculator gives you 4.2. Now, ultimately, we're trying to find the length of the runway. The length of the runway is the distance between this blue dot, that's the beginning of the runway, and the purple dot is the end of the runway. So the distance we're looking for is y, which is the distance between the blue and the purple dot. So y is simply going to be the distance of z minus the distance of x. And so y equals z minus x over here on the right, which is 4.2 minus 3, which gives you y equals 1.2.